The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of our family's boardroom, but I couldn't focus on the view. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat across from my father, watching him adjust his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the leather chairs and coffee that had been brewing too long. "Nick, I've been thinking about the future of Morrison Manufacturing," he began, his weathered hands folded on the mahogany table. At 62, Robert Morrison still commanded respect in every room he entered, but today something felt different. His usually confident demeanor seemed strained. I straightened in my chair, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation in my stomach. For 3 years since graduating from Northwestern with my MBA, I'd been working at the company, implementing new digital marketing strategies, streamlining operations, and building relationships with younger clients. The quarterly reports spoke for themselves. Revenue was up 18% since I'd joined the team. "I'm ready to step down," he continued, and the words hung in the air like smoke. "This company needs fresh leadership, someone who can take it into the next decade." My mother, Sarah, shifted in her seat beside him. Her perfectly manicured fingers twisted her wedding ring, a habit she'd had since I was a child. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad, I've been preparing for this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The sustainability initiative I proposed could save us hundreds of thousands annually, and the client retention program has already shown a 15% improvement in—" "Nick, honey," he interrupted, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "I've decided to give the company to your brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the color drain from my face as I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Jake was 23, fresh out of college with a business degree he'd barely earned. He'd worked at the company for exactly 8 months, spending most of that time in the warehouse learning basic operations. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to whisper. "Jake will be taking over as CEO effective next month," my father said, avoiding my gaze. "He's shown real promise, and frankly, the business needs strong male leadership moving forward. Our clients respect that." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "Dad, you can't be serious. I've been here 3 years. I've increased our profit margins, brought in new contracts, modernized our systems, and you've done excellent work." My mother finally spoke up, her voice apologetic but firm. "But this is a family business, Nick. Your brother will carry on the Morrison name." "So will I!" The words exploded from me before I could stop them. "I'm a Morrison too." My father's jaw tightened. "When you get married, you'll take your husband's name. Jake's children will be Morrisons. This is about legacy, about tradition." I felt like I was drowning. 25 years of believing I was an equal part of this family, of working toward this moment, and it was being stripped away because of my gender. The injustice burned in my throat. "The decision is final," my father said, standing up. "Jake will be moving into the corner office next week. You'll continue as operations manager, of course. We value your contribution." I sat there in stunned silence as my parents gathered their papers and left the boardroom. The Chicago wind rattled the windows, and I realized I was shaking, not from cold, but from rage. That night, I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, staring at my laptop screen. The business plan I'd been perfecting for months glowed back at me. Detailed projections, market analysis, strategic partnerships, all worthless now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Hope you're not too upset, sis. We'll make a great team." I almost threw my phone across the room. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching something that had been nagging at me since the meeting. Meridian Capital had been our biggest investor for 5 years, holding 40% of the company's shares. They'd been quiet partners, but their investment was crucial to our operations. As I dug deeper into public records and financial filings, a plan began to form in my mind. If my family thought they could dismiss me so easily, they were about to learn exactly what kind of Morrison they were dealing with. The next morning, I called David Chen, my former professor and now a successful venture capitalist. We'd kept in touch since graduation, and he'd often mentioned his interest in manufacturing investments. "David, I need to talk to you about an opportunity," I said, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago River gold. "And I need your help with something that might get very interesting." By the time I hung up, my hands had stopped shaking. I wasn't going to let them write me off, not without a fight. David Chen's office in downtown Chicago felt like a sanctuary compared to the suffocating atmosphere at Morrison Manufacturing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River, and the modern glass desk reflected the afternoon sunlight as I spread out my research papers. "You want to do what?" David asked, his dark eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been my favorite professor at Northwestern, and now at 38, he ran one of the most successful venture capital firms in the Midwest. I want to buy out Meridian Capital's stake in my family's company, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. They hold 40% of Morrison Manufacturing. If I can acquire their shares, I'll be the largest shareholder. David leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the same intensity he'd shown during our graduate seminars. Nick, that's a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Meridian invested $12 million 5 years ago. With the company's growth, those shares are worth at least $18 million now. The number hit me like a cold wave, but I'd already done the math. My savings account held exactly $43,000, and my annual salary was $68,000. On paper, it was impossible. I know it sounds crazy, I said, pulling out my laptop, but I've been researching Meridian's portfolio. They've been liquidating their manufacturing investments over the past 2 years. They're pivoting to tech startups. I showed him the financial reports I'd spent all night analyzing. Look at this. They sold their stake in Hartwell Industries last month and Richmond Manufacturing in September. Both were similar to our company. Steady returns, but not the explosive growth they're looking for now. David's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. You think they'd be willing to sell? I think they'd be eager to sell, I corrected, especially if someone offered them a clean exit without having to go through the hassle of finding a buyer themselves. He stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Even if that's true, Nick, you don't have the capital for this. That's where I need your help, I said, my heart pounding. I've been thinking about this all night. What if we formed a partnership? You provide the capital, I provide the inside knowledge and operational expertise. We split the ownership. David turned back to me, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. You're talking about a hostile takeover of your own family's company. I'm talking about becoming the largest shareholder in a company I've helped build, I corrected. My father always said business isn't personal. Well, this is just business. The silence stretched between us. Finally, David sat back down and opened his laptop. Tell me more about Morrison Manufacturing's financials. Real numbers, not just what's in the annual reports. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. The company's true profit margins, the potential for growth, the weak points in our current strategy that Jake would never see. I showed him the contracts I'd secured, the efficiency improvements I'd implemented, the relationships I'd built with key clients. You really think your brother can't handle this? David asked, scrolling through the financial projections. Jake's a good kid, but he's not ready, I said honestly. He doesn't understand our clients. He's never negotiated a major contract, and he has no idea how to handle the supply chain issues we're going to face next quarter. Dad's making this decision based on tradition, not business sense. David closed his laptop and looked at me directly. If we do this, Nick, there's no going back. Your family will see this as a betrayal. I thought about the look in my father's eyes when he dismissed my years of work, the way my mother had avoided my gaze. They betrayed me first, I said quietly. All right, David said, extending his hand. Let's make some calls. The next week was a whirlwind of meetings and phone calls. David's connections in the investment world were impressive, and through a contact at Goldman Sachs, we managed to get a meeting with Meridian Capital's managing partner, Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on knowing when to hold and when to fold. We met at the Four Seasons, in a private dining room that cost more than I made in a month. Elizabeth arrived exactly on time, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my car. Mr. Chen, Ms. Morrison, she said, settling into her chair. I understand you're interested in discussing our position in Morrison Manufacturing. We are, David said smoothly. We believe there might be mutual benefit in a transaction. Elizabeth's eyes flicked to me. You're Robert Morrison's daughter, aren't you? I remember meeting you at the Christmas party 2 years ago. Yes, ma'am, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. And you want to buy us out of your own family's company? Her tone was neutral, but I caught the slight smile at the corner of her mouth. I want to ensure the company reaches its full potential, I replied, which requires the right leadership. Elizabeth studied me for a long moment. We've been considering our exit strategy for Morrison Manufacturing. The returns have been steady but not exceptional. Tech offers more growth potential for our portfolio. David leaned forward. What would it take to make this happen? 20 million, Elizabeth said without hesitation. The company's grown since our initial investment. We want fair value. I felt my heart sink. That was 2 million more than we'd budgeted for. But David didn't flinch. We can work with that, he said. When would you need an answer? End of the month, Elizabeth replied. We're finalizing our quarterly positions. As we walked out of the Four Seasons, the Chicago wind whipping around us, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. We had 3 weeks to put together $20 million and execute a plan that would change everything. Can we actually do this? I I asked David as we hailed a taxi. He smiled, and for the first time, I saw the same gleam in his eyes that had made him my favorite professor. Nick, in business, the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. Your family made the mistake of underestimating you. Let's make sure they don't get the chance to do it again. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of coffee, spreadsheets, and sleepless nights. David and I had transformed his conference room into a war room, with whiteboards covered in financial projections and timelines. The weight of what we were attempting pressed down on me every morning when I walked into Morrison Manufacturing, pretending everything was normal. "Good morning, Nick," Jake said, bouncing into my office with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never faced real responsibility. He'd already moved into Dad's corner office, and the sight of him behind that massive oak desk made my stomach turn. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my computer screen. I was reviewing the final documents from our loan application with First National Bank of Chicago. David had leveraged his firm's credit rating and reputation to secure $15 million in financing, while I'd put up my apartment and every asset I owned as collateral for the remaining $5 million. "Dad wants to implement some new policies," Jake continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. "He thinks we should focus more on traditional manufacturing methods. Get back to our roots, you know?" I finally looked up at him, my brother who'd inherited everything I'd worked for. "What kind of policies?" "Well, he's thinking we should cut back on some of the digital marketing stuff you've been doing. It's expensive, and he's not sure it's really bringing in the right kind of clients." My digital marketing campaigns had increased our client base by 30% over the past year. The right kind of clients apparently meant the old-fashioned ones who preferred handshake deals and didn't ask too many questions about efficiency or sustainability. "That's interesting," I said, forcing a smile. "Have you looked at the quarterly reports on those campaigns?" Jake's blank stare told me everything I needed to know. "Well, I mean, I've been busy getting settled in, but Dad knows what he's talking about." After Jake left, I closed my office door and called David. "We need to move faster," I said. "They're already making decisions that will hurt the company's value." "The papers are almost ready," David assured me. "Elizabeth confirmed she can meet us Thursday to finalize everything. Are you ready for this?" Was I ready? I'd been asking myself that question every day for 2 weeks. Ready to potentially destroy my relationship with my family? Ready to bet everything I owned on a plan that could backfire spectacularly? Ready to prove that I was more than just Robert Morrison's daughter? "I'm ready," I said. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Chicago weather that matched my mood. I'd barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my mind. David picked me up at 7 a.m., and we drove to the downtown offices of Meridian Capital in relative silence. The Meridian building was all glass and steel, reaching toward the cloudy sky like a corporate cathedral. Elizabeth Warren's office was on the 42nd floor, with a view that made our family's boardroom look quaint. She was waiting for us with her legal team, 3 sharp-suited lawyers who looked like they could negotiate the purchase of the moon. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Chen." Elizabeth stood and shook our hands. "I trust you've had time to review our terms?" "We have," David said, setting his briefcase on the conference table. "Everything looks acceptable." For the next hour, we went through the documents line by line: share transfer agreements, financial disclosures, non-compete clauses. My hands trembled slightly as I signed my name on page after page, each signature bringing me closer to the point of no return. "One final detail," Elizabeth said as we neared the end. "We'll need to notify Morrison Manufacturing's board of directors about the ownership change within 48 hours. It's required by the original investment agreement." My heart stopped. "The board? But that includes my father and my brother." "I'm afraid so," Elizabeth said, not unkindly. "They have a right to know who their new partner is." David reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "It was always going to come out, Nick. At least this way, you control the timing." I thought about my father's face when he'd told me the company needed strong male leadership. I thought about my mother's inability to meet my eyes. I thought about Jake's casual dismissal of my work. "When do we make the announcement?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Elizabeth replied. "I'll call your father personally." That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. I'd written and deleted a dozen text messages to my parents, trying to find the right words to explain what I'd done. How do you tell your family that you've just bought control of their company out from under them? Finally, I gave up and called my best friend from college, Maria, who was working as a lawyer in New York. "You did what?" she screamed into the phone after I'd explained everything. "I bought out Meridian Capital," I repeated. "Tomorrow morning, I'll officially be the largest shareholder in Morrison Manufacturing." "Nick, that's either the most brilliant thing you've ever done or the most insane." "Probably both," I admitted. "But Maria, you should have seen the look on my father's face when he gave the company to Jake, like I didn't even exist." "So what happens now?" I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, the lights twinkling like stars. Now I find out what I'm really made of. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., my father's assistant knocked on my door. "Nick, your father wants to see you in his office immediately." I walked down the hallway on unsteady legs, past the framed photos of company milestones and family achievements. The door to the corner office was open, and I could see my father behind his desk, his face red with fury. Jake stood beside him, looking confused and scared. "Elizabeth Warren called me this morning," my father said without preamble. "She told me some very interesting news." I stepped into the office and closed the door behind me. "Dad, I can explain. You bought out our biggest investor?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "You're now the largest shareholder in Morrison Manufacturing?" "Yes," I said, lifting my chin. "I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father exploded. "How dare you? How dare you go behind our backs and manipulate our business partners? This is betrayal, Nick. This is unforgivable." "Unforgivable?" I shot back, my own anger finally breaking free. "What's unforgivable is giving away everything I've worked for because you think a woman can't run a company. What's unforgivable is dismissing 3 years of my life because tradition matters more than talent." Jake stepped forward, his face pale. "Nick, what does this mean?" I looked at my younger brother, seeing him clearly for the first time. "It means, Jake, that things are about to change around here." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. I spent the morning in my office, trying to focus on work while my stomach churned with anxiety. Word had spread quickly through the company, hushed conversations in the hallways, curious glances from employees who sensed something major was happening. My mother arrived at noon, her usually perfect composure cracked. She knocked on my doorframe, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands shaking slightly. "Nick, honey, can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same one Jake had occupied just days earlier when he'd casually dismissed my work. "Of course, Mom." She sat down heavily, aging 10 years in the span of a morning. "I don't understand what you've done. Your father he's devastated. He feels like you've stabbed him in the back." "I've stabbed him in the back?" The words came out harsher than I intended. "Mom, he gave away my future without even discussing it with me. He dismissed everything I've accomplished here because I'm a woman. That's not fair, Nick. Your father loves you. He just believes in traditional values." "Traditional values that say I'm worth less than Jake?" I interrupted. "That my MBA from Northwestern, my 3 years of increasing this company's profits, my relationships with our clients, none of that matters because I might someday change my last name?" My mother's face crumpled. "You're tearing this family apart." "I'm not tearing anything apart, Mom. I'm fighting for what I've earned." She left without another word, and I sat alone in my office, staring at the financial reports spread across my desk. The numbers that had always made sense to me now felt like foreign language. Had I made a terrible mistake? At 2 o'clock, I walked into the boardroom for what might be the most important meeting of my life. The usual suspects were there. My father at the head of the table, my mother beside him, Jake looking lost and overwhelmed. Our company lawyer, Mitchell Barnes, sat rigidly in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding around him. But there was also a new face, David Chen, who now represented my interests as the largest shareholder. He gave me a slight nod as I took my seat across from my father. "Let's get this over with," my father said, his voice cold and formal. "Mitchell, explain the situation." Mitchell cleared his throat and opened his folder. "As of this morning, Nick Morrison, through her partnership with Chen Ventures, owns 40% of Morrison Manufacturing's shares. This makes her the largest individual shareholder and gives her significant voting power on all major company decisions." "What does this mean for Jake's position?" my mother asked quietly. "The CEO position is appointed by the board," Mitchell explained. "With Nick's voting power, she now has considerable influence over that decision." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, the years of family history, the expectations and disappointments that had led us to this moment. "I want to call a vote of no confidence in Jake's appointment as CEO," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. "Nick," my mother gasped. "You can't do this," my father said, his face flushed with anger. "This is still a family business. You can't just—" "I can and I will," I interrupted. "This company is failing under current leadership. Jake has been CEO for 2 weeks and has already proposed cutting our most successful marketing programs. He doesn't understand our clients, our supply chain, or our competitive position in the market." Jake finally spoke up, his voice small and hurt. "Nick, I'm trying my best. I know I have a lot to learn, but—" "Jake, you're a good person," I said, looking directly at my brother. "But being a good person doesn't automatically make you a good CEO. This company employs 67 people. Their families depend on our success. We can't run this business on sentiment and tradition. So what are you proposing? My father asked through gritted teeth. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. I'm proposing that I take over as CEO, effective immediately. I'm also proposing we implement a comprehensive modernization plan that will increase our efficiency by 25% and expand our market share. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face had gone from red to purple, and I worried he might have a heart attack right there in the boardroom. You manipulative little... He started. Robert. David interrupted calmly. Let's keep this professional. Nick is proposing what she believes is best for the company's future. Perhaps we should hear her out. For the next hour, I presented the business plan I'd been refining for months. Market analysis, financial projections, strategic partnerships. I showed them how we could diversify our product line, expand into sustainable manufacturing, and leverage technology to improve our operations. Jake listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions that showed he was beginning to understand the complexity of what he'd inherited. My mother looked torn between pride in my abilities and loyalty to my father's vision, but my father sat in stony silence, his jaw clenched, his hands folded tightly on the table. The numbers are impressive, Mitchell admitted when I finished. This plan could significantly increase the company's value. This isn't about numbers, my father finally exploded. This is about respect, about loyalty, about what it means to be a Morrison. You've betrayed everything this family stands for. What does this family stand for, Dad? I shot back. Because I thought it stood for hard work, for merit, for building something meaningful. But apparently it only stands for those things if you're male. That's enough, he slammed his hand on the table. You want to destroy everything I've built? Fine, but don't pretend this is about business. This is about revenge. It's about justice, I said quietly. And it's about saving this company from decisions that will run it into the ground. David cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a vote. All in favor of Nick Morrison serving as CEO of Morrison Manufacturing? I raised my hand immediately. David raised his. After a long moment, Jake slowly raised his hand too. Jake! My father stared at his son in shock. Dad, she's right, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'm doing. I've been pretending, but I don't understand half of what she just presented. The company needs someone who actually knows how to run it. My mother looked at Jake, then at me, then at my father. Finally, reluctantly, she raised her hand. The motion passes, Mitchell announced. Nick Morrison is the new CEO of Morrison Manufacturing. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over, he said, looking directly at me. You may have won today, but you've lost your family. I hope it was worth it. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind 40 years of dreams and the daughter who'd just shattered them. As the room emptied, I sat alone at the head of the table, staring out at the Chicago skyline. I'd won. I was CEO of Morrison Manufacturing. But as I listened to my mother's quiet sobs echoing down the hallway, I wondered if victory was supposed to feel so much like defeat. 3 months later, I stood in the same boardroom where my world had collapsed and been rebuilt. But everything felt different now. The mahogany table was covered with contracts for 3 new major clients, and the quarterly reports showed a 12% increase in revenue. The Chicago skyline outside looked brighter somehow, or maybe that was just my perspective. The sustainability initiative is ahead of schedule, David said, reviewing the latest numbers. We're already seeing interest from companies that never would have considered us before. Jake sat beside me, no longer the overwhelmed kid who'd inherited a job he wasn't ready for. Over the past months, he'd thrown himself into learning every aspect of the business, working in different departments, asking questions, and proving he was more than just a name on the door. The new manufacturing process is reducing waste by 30%, he reported, his confidence growing with each meeting. And the team is really excited about the employee suggestion program Nick implemented. It hadn't been easy. The first month was brutal, dealing with employees who were confused by the sudden changes, clients who weren't sure what to expect, and the constant weight of knowing my father barely spoke to me anymore. But slowly, steadily, the company began to respond to the changes. There's something else, I said, pulling out a folder I'd been keeping close to my chest. I got a call from Harrison Industries yesterday. They want to discuss a potential merger. David's eyebrows shot up. Harrison Industries? Nick, that's a $200 million company. They're impressed with our turnaround, I explained. They want to combine our manufacturing capabilities with their distribution network. It would make us the 3rd largest specialty manufacturer in the Midwest. Jake whistled low. Dad's going to flip when he hears this. My father. The elephant in the room we'd all been dancing around. He'd been coming to the office sporadically, reviewing reports, but avoiding direct contact with me. My mother had been trying to play peacemaker, but the wounds were still too fresh. Actually, I said carefully, I think it's time we had a family meeting about this. All of us. That evening, I sat in my parents' living room in Lincoln Park, surrounded by the same family photos and memories that had shaped my childhood. My mother had made coffee and her famous chocolate chip cookies, a peace offering that reminded me of homework sessions and Christmas mornings. My father sat in his favorite armchair, looking older than his 62 years. The past 3 months had been hard on him too, watching his life's work transformed by the daughter he felt had betrayed him. The Harrison Industries offer is substantial, I began, setting the proposal on the coffee table. But before we make any decisions, we need to clear the air as a family. There's nothing to clear, my father said coldly. You made your choice. You chose business over family. Dad, I chose competence over tradition, I replied. And it's worked. The company is stronger than it's ever been. At what cost? His voice cracked slightly. I built Morrison Manufacturing with my own hands. I worked 60-hour weeks for 20 years to create something meaningful, something to pass down to my children, and you turned it into just another corporate acquisition. I felt tears stinging my eyes. Dad, I've spent every day of the past 3 months trying to honor what you built while making it sustainable for the future. I didn't destroy your legacy. I preserved it. My mother reached across the space between us and took my hand. Nick, honey, your father is proud of what you've accomplished. He just wishes it hadn't happened this way. I'm not proud, my father said harshly. I'm devastated. My daughter manipulated business partners, undermined her own family, and stole the company I intended for my son. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice rising. I earned it. I've been earning it for 3 years, and you refuse to see it. Jake, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Dad, stop. We all turned to look at him. He'd been quiet during most of the family conflict, trying to navigate between his loyalty to our father and his recognition that I was the better choice for the company. Dad, Nick didn't steal anything from me, Jake continued. She saved me from a job I wasn't ready for. Do you know what my first month as CEO was like? I was terrified every single day. I didn't understand the contracts. I couldn't read the financial reports, and I was making decisions that could have hurt people's livelihoods. My father's face softened slightly. Son, you would have learned, maybe, Jake interrupted. But why should I have to learn on the job when Nick already knew how to do it? Why should the company suffer while I figured out what she'd mastered years ago? He turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just love, but respect. Nick, you've been protecting this company and this family since you graduated. You've been the real leader here for years. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My father stared at his hands, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. I wanted to give you something special, he said quietly. When I started this company, I dreamed of the day I could hand it over to my son, the way my father handed his business to me. It was supposed to be about tradition, about continuity. Dad, I said gently, I am your child too. And I've been continuing your tradition, the tradition of hard work, of caring about quality, of treating employees like family. I've just been doing it in a different way. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had helped me with my first business plan in college, who had always been my hero even when he couldn't see my worth. The Harrison Industries deal, he said finally. Tell me more about it. We spent the next 2 hours going through the proposal, discussing the implications, the opportunities, the risks. My father asked pointed questions that showed he still had a sharp business mind, and slowly I watched him begin to see what I'd been building. It's good, he admitted finally. It's better than good. It's the kind of strategic thinking that will take Morrison Manufacturing to the next level. We'd maintain operational independence, I explained. Our name, our culture, our values. But we'd have access to resources and markets we could never reach alone. And you'd be the CEO of the combined manufacturing division? My mother asked. That's what they're proposing, I said. It would make me one of the youngest executives in the industry. My father was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my complete surprise, he smiled. You know what? You deserve it. You've earned it. The words I'd been waiting to hear for 3 years. For my entire life, really. I felt tears spilling down my cheeks. I'm sorry, he said, standing up and walking over to me. I'm sorry I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I'm sorry I let my old-fashioned ideas blind me to your talent. And I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to fight your own family to prove your worth. He pulled me into a hug, and I felt like I was 7 years old again, safe in my father's arms. I'm proud of you, Nick. I should have said that a long time ago. 6 months later, I stood in the same boardroom one more time, but now it was part of Harrison Morrison Industries. The view was the same, but the nameplate on the door read, Nicole Morrison, CEO, Manufacturing Division. David had stayed on as an advisor, his investment in me proving to be one of his most successful ventures. Jake had found his calling in operations management, working directly with our production teams and loving every minute of it. My father had taken on a consulting role, sharing his decades of experience with our expanded team. Most importantly, he'd become my strongest supporter, proud to tell anyone who would listen about his daughter's business acumen. The quarterly numbers are in, my assistant announced, bringing in the reports I'd been waiting for. Revenue is up 38% from last year, and employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. I looked out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought me here, the pain of being overlooked, the risk of standing up for myself, the cost of fighting for what I believed in. It had all led to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dinner Sunday? Your father wants to discuss some ideas he has for the new sustainability program. I smiled, remembering the day when I thought I'd lost everything. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the moments when we refuse to accept defeat. Sometimes the best way to honor tradition is to build something even better than what came before. I picked up my phone and typed back, I'll be there. Can't wait to hear his ideas. Outside, Chicago stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities I was finally free to explore.